Welcome back, everyone, to your daily news roundup. It's February 20th, 2025, and we've got a lot to unpack today.
Definitely feels like another busy news day. What are we diving into first?
Let's head over to the Middle East. Israel's on high alert.
Oh, right, after those buses exploded.
Yeah, 3 buses in Bat Yam.
Thankfully, no casualties.
Right, no casualties, but still a suspected terrorist attack.
And they found 2 more devices that didn't go off. One had a message, apparently. Something about the Israeli counterterrorism operations.
In the West Bank.
Exactly, so it seems connected, like retaliation.
And then there's the hostage situation in Gaza.
Oh, man, that's just awful.
The bodies of 2 children and a peace activist were returned. Oded Lifshitz.
Horrible, just horrible.
Hamas claims they also returned Shiri Bibas.
But Israel says that's not true.
Right, they're demanding all hostages back.
Both living and deceased. It's just a terrible situation. And on top of all that, there's this expose about the opioid crisis.
In West Africa.
Yeah.
That's right. An Indian pharmaceutical company. Avio Pharmaceuticals.
They're manufacturing these highly addictive opioids.
And illegally exporting them. Mostly to young people in Ghana, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire.
It's causing a huge public health crisis.
And the worst part is, they know how harmful these drugs are.
There's undercover footage of the Aveo director, Vinod Sharma, admitting it. But he says it's all about the profit.
That's awful.
Really highlights how some companies just disregard human life.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, over in Germany, they've got a big election coming up.
And the far-right AfD party's gaining ground.
Yeah, a lot of people are unhappy with how the government's handling the economy.
And migration and defense.
Right, the AfD is really appealing to voters who are disillusioned with the traditional parties.
They've tapped into some of that same rhetoric that we saw with Donald Trump.
Interesting. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Speaking of Trump.
What's he up to now?
Well, there's some new developments with his foreign policy towards Ukraine. Seems President Zelensky is under a lot of pressure from the Trump administration.
What kind of pressure?
To give the U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral resources.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Trump's even linked U.S. aid to Ukraine with this demand.
So basically holding the aid hostage.
Pretty much.
What's Zelensky saying?
He's looking for an investment and security agreement with the U.S., but he's refusing to sell their resources.
That makes sense. You can't just give away your country's resources.
Absolutely. And to make matters even more complicated, the Trump administration is negotiating directly with Russia.
To end the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, but they're completely sidelining Zelensky.
So much for supporting Ukraine's sovereignty.
Right. And then there's the surprising development out of China. Remember Jack Ma?
The Alibaba founder, the one who kind of disappeared.
That's him. Well, he's back. He just made a very public appearance with President Xi Jinping.
Interesting. I wonder what that means.
A lot of people think it signals that the Chinese government might be easing up on their crackdown on the tech industry.
Makes sense. They need to revitalize their economy.
And compete with the U.S. in sectors like AI, especially with those sanctions.
A lot going on there. Big development for sure.
It is. Now, before we get into the more complex stories, let's go over some of the other big headlines from around the world.
Sounds good. What else is happening?
Well, a German court just ruled that Birkenstock sandals aren't art.
Really?
So no copyright protection.
That's a bummer for Birkenstock. All those knockoffs.
It is. Then there's the Delta Airlines crash landing in Toronto.
Oh, right. That was a scary one.
They're offering passengers $30,000 each.
That's pretty generous.
It is. Moving on to the international stage, South Africa is hosting the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting, a big focus on multilateralism.
Which is interesting because the U.S. isn't even going.
Right. Very isolationist.
Yeah.
Then we have the Mexican army.
What do?
They arrested the security chief of El Chapo's son.
A big win in the fight against cartels.
It is. And finally, Senator Mitch McConnell announced his retirement.
Wow. End of an era.
It is.
A lot to take in already.
There is. But there's even more to come.
Big changes for James Bond.
Right, with Amazon taking over the franchise.
Yeah, they got full creative control now.
What do you think that means for the future of Bond?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
A lot of people are thinking maybe more spin-offs.
Oh, interesting.
Like origin stories, maybe? For the villains?
Well, we could see like a young Goldfinger.
Exactly. Or Moneypenny, even.
That would be pretty different.
It would. Big departure from the classic Bond formula.
Some fans will love it. Others will hate it, I'm sure.
Probably. And then there's the question of who will play Bond.
Right. Daniel Craig left some big shoes to fill.
He did.
Yeah.
Tough act to follow. Okay, let's move on to something a bit different. Fog harvesting in Chile.
Fog harvesting?
Yeah, they're looking at it as a solution to water scarcity.
Interesting. How does that even work?
Well, they use these big meshes to collect water droplets from fog.
But can they really get enough water that way to supply a whole city?
That's what they're trying to figure out.
Okay.
Some areas, like Alto Hospicio, they have these really consistent fog conditions.
So they could potentially get a reliable water source that way.
That's the idea.
Makes sense.
Boy.
Especially with climate change making water shortages more common.
Yeah, definitely a promising solution. All right, let's shift gears again. This time to South Korea.
What's happening there?
They're dealing with a rise in conspiracy theories.
Oh, wow. Like what?
A lot of them are coming from these far-right groups,
Okay.
and they're often amplified by President Yoon. He's been facing a lot of political turmoil lately.
So what kind of theories are we talking about?
Well, one of the more concerning ones claims that the opposition party wants to unify with North Korea.
And turn South Korea into a communist state.
Exactly.
Wow, that's pretty out there.
It is. But it plays on those historical tensions between North and South Korea.
Right.
And President Yoon's been accused of exploiting those fears.
To his advantage.
Exactly. He even suggested that North Korea interfered in the last election.
Without any evidence.
Yeah, a lot of people see it as a tactic to demonize the opposition.
And justify his own actions.
Exactly, like that whole thing with martial law.
Right. So how are people reacting to all of this?
It's causing a lot of division in South Korea. Some people want Yoon removed from office, while others are actually buying into these conspiracy theories.
Dangerous situation.
It is. It really shows how fragile democracy can be.
And how misinformation can spread so easily.
Exactly. Makes you think. Speaking of information, we should probably talk about social media and AI.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
It is. There's a lot of concern about how AI is being used on these platforms.
For manipulation.
Exactly. These algorithms can be used to shape public opinion.
Even influence elections.
That's right. We've already seen examples of it.
We have. It's something we need to be really careful about.
Absolutely. The potential for misuse is huge.
It is. We need more transparency from these tech companies.
And accountability.
Definitely. This is something we should discuss more in depth.
I agree. There's a lot more to unpack there.
There is. All right, before we wrap up, let's touch on a couple other interesting stories.
Sure. What else do you have?
Well, there's been a big breakthrough in renewable energy.
Oh, tell me more.
Researchers developed a new type of solar panel that's way more efficient.
That's fantastic news, especially with the fight against climate change.
Right. We can really reduce our reliance on fossil fuels.
And make solar power more affordable for everyone.
Exactly. Okay, and now for something completely different. A lost Da Vinci painting has been rediscovered.
No way.
Yeah, it's a portrait of a young noblewoman. They thought he was destroyed centuries ago.
Wow, that's huge.
It is.
Yeah.
Experts are calling it one of the most significant art finds in decades.
Incredible. Makes you wonder what else is out there just waiting to be found.
It does. It really does. It makes you wonder what else is still out there. We covered some heavy stuff today.
We did the Middle East, the opioid crisis, Germany, Ukraine, China.
A lot to think about. What do you think is the most important thing we talked about?
It's hard to pick just one, but I think the main thing is just how connected everything is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a conflict on the other side of the world, a public health crisis, even new technology. It all has these ripple effects. We're all connected globally. And understanding those connections is so crucial now.
That's a good point. It means we have to stay informed about what's going on, not just here, but everywhere.
Right. And it really shows how important global cooperation is. None of these problems can be solved by one country alone. It takes dialogue, working together, and a shared commitment to finding solutions.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that about wraps up today's Daily News Roundup. Always a pleasure discussing these important topics with you.
Likewise, always a fascinating conversation.
We'll be back tomorrow with more news and analysis. But until then, we encourage you to keep exploring these topics. Do your own research, form your own opinions, and most importantly, stay engaged.
Stay curious. Stay informed.
Take care, everyone.